Hi everyone! Today I'm going to talk about the brewing technique and why I don't care about the water temperature. This follows a discussion that I had on my Discord channel yesterday with some tea enthusiasts. Of course, you know, on my Discord channel people like to geek out about tea, and of course the tea brewing technique is supposed to be very important. So let me first bring the water to a boil. Here it is. And prepare my tea. Today I'm going to drink that Bangwai single trees tea that we made in spring 2025. So it's still a fairly young tea, although it's already early 2026. Best wishes for this year if you're watching this video as it's released. So I'm going to put about this much tea. And you see that I brought my water to a boil. But actually, I don't really care about the temperature because it's not convenient. Let me first tell you the story of when I started drinking tea. I think, like every tea student, I was really fascinated by the knowledge of the tea shop owner. And the place I went to was a basic tea shop. The owner was very nice and quite knowledgeable. But since then, I visited a lot of tea shops, and I found out that in all of the tea shops you go, when you buy tea, they will tell you about which water temperature to use and how long to brew the tea, right? So if you buy a black tea, they're going to tell you it's like 3 minutes with 90-degree water, 90 degrees Celsius. And so it's as if only those two parameters were the most important in giving you a good brew. And of course, at the beginning, I would trust that. So I had my chronometer, and I had bought a special kettle which would bring the water to the right temperature. And by the way, typically they are not always well calibrated, so it's not really accurate. But psychologically, it's very reassuring to know that all the parameters are right and that your tea is going to taste the best because you've respected the water temperature and the infusion time. I'm not rinsing my tea today because I didn't bring a bowl, but it's no problem because it's very clean tea and it's often very nice. This is the kind of soft tea. I love Bangwai because it's very soft. It's a bit similar to Iwu, but still a bit different. I like the bite that you get when you drink the tea. It's very mellow, but also powerful. And so you see, I used boiling water for this first infusion, but I could have used slightly less hot water. The reason why I don't care is that I stopped caring. At first, I would listen to the tea shop owner's instructions, so I would be very accurate. I would take my chronometer and my timer, make sure everything is right. And after a while, after maybe 1 year of drinking tea, I would think, actually, this is a bit stupid. I will do my own experiments. And so I will start monitoring these parameters. So I did this. I found out that a lot of those parameters in the tea shops were a bit arbitrary, and that indeed you can get different tastes if you change the parameters. And then I started to geek out. I figured, okay, for example, in the Gongfu style, you do several brews. So it means that the time of each brew is important, but actually, right now, my leaves are still being extracted because there is water on the surface, and it slowly pulls the polyphenols out from the inside of the leaves. So it means that I should not only take into account the infusion time, but also the time between infusions. If I flash brew and I brew like brew after brew without letting the tea rest, I should use longer brewing times because the water doesn't have any time in between the brews to extract the polyphenols. But for example, if I'm drinking on my own and I'm just casually brewing maybe once every 5 minutes, I have to take this into account. During those 5 minutes, the tea will have been brewing a little bit just because of the surface water. So it's not only those two parameters. You would have like the infusion time between the brews. Okay, but then you would think for longer brews, you have to take into account the thermal conductivity. So if you use a big guy one, with a big and thick guy one, if you have preheated it, it should have hold the temperature better than a thin guy one that you hadn't preheated, for example. Okay, so then you get into clay. So I guess you can think a lot about this, the thermal conductivity. Okay, but then there are also more important parameters that I found out later actually. It's like the water quality. And often in the tea shops they don't really mention that, but using soft water is much more important than respecting any kind of brewing parameters, because it will really brighten the taste of tea, make it more crisp, just like listening to music on good speakers. So I geeked out for a while, and it gets very complicated, because then when you're going to brew your tea, it feels like you're going to launch a rocket to the moon, you know, like you have to take so many parameters into account. But of course these are legitimate questions when you are beginning, and there are more questions to overcome. Maybe that's how the tea goes, like you will never really answer the question, but you will overcome the question. Let me drink a little bit of tea. I think that the real question for what would the perfect brewing parameters be is it's impossible to answer, first because we haven't defined what the perfect taste would be. Now, of course, you have your own opinion, so you could have in your mind like your ideal tea and work hard on one tea to extract the best out of it. But then you could imagine that these parameters would have to vary a bit for each tea. So it would be very complicated, but it's still a topic worth researching. Even if you don't find the answer, the process of researching actually teaches you a lot about how that works. And then after maybe 2 years of tea drinking, no, actually it occurred when I had just arrived in China. That was back in 2010, and at that time suddenly I had a lot of different teas available, and I felt like I just didn't have time anymore to play with those parameters. So you see, now I've been talking for a bit, my water has probably cooled down, but it's okay, you know. What really matters is to look at the leaves, and after you get a lot of experience, after you've brewed tea for maybe 1,000 times, you will get kind of a feel as if there was a pulse coming from the gaiwan or the teapot and telling you when to pour. And maybe if you test objectively, maybe the brew strength is not equal between the infusions. But it's okay, because when I'm brewing tea, I'm not looking at tea. I don't want to brew a standard teacup. I want to go through a story, experience a development in the tea. And I think that's all that's all the point of the poor tea culture. It's inherently less scientific and more of an art, because each session is unique. And it can be worth exploring some kind of standardization. I think it's just one step on your tea journey. But what I find out is most experienced people in the end don't really care anymore. That's really the essence. Maybe one of the final goals of Kung Fu is that you're doing things with feeling. But since you've practiced so much, they are still fairly accurate scientifically. And often when it comes to brewing time and temperature, people will ask you in China, like, do you prefer strong tea or lighter tea? And people will try to brew it accordingly. So it's very much like cooking. You don't really need to know your pan temperature in order to cook a steak well. You just need to look and feel and taste. It's just an extension of making tea in the factory, actually. What really matters is to be open to the tea. The best tea sessions I've had in my life were not when I brewed everything right. It was when I was the most aware of the tea and took it in really. And I don't even remember how strong it was or how I brewed the tea. What I remembered is that I was open and really enjoyed it. That's really what you want to achieve. But just to finish the video and to give hints of answers for people who are still looking, because really if you're interested in that topic, do your research and do your own experiment. It's a topic worth exploring. I found personally that if you use lower temperature, you can bring out the umami a bit better in tea, while if you use hot temperature, maybe you extract a bit more bitterness, astringency, more of everything. So that's why often, especially for Japanese green tea, they will recommend that you don't use boiling water, but like water at like 50 or 60 degrees Celsius. But in the case of pu'er tea or all the gongfu teas, actually, like the oolong teas too, hot water is preferred. Also, well, because when you're tasting this tea, you just want to take everything. To me, it would be a sign of a bad leaf quality if you had to use like lower temperature water in order to enjoy it. Because in that case, I think, yeah, of course well, if you only have one tea and your goal is to brew it as good as possible, then maybe go ahead, you can experiment. But if you're trying to compare different areas, for example, and understand how the tea works, I think it's just better to most of the time use boiling water and try to extract as much as possible, because when the tea is brewed strong, it doesn't lie. And I found that people, as they go through their tea journey, they tend to brew the tea stronger and stronger, which might be a mistake actually. Maybe I should learn to brew tea lighter sometimes. But yes, so if you want more umami, so maybe for like an Oriental beauty, for Japanese green tea, for all green teas, you want to bring out more umami and you want to tone down the astringency, then it's better to use longer brewing time and slightly less hot water temperature, like 80, 90 degrees. But for most things, I would recommend boiling water. And if you don't have boiling water, for example, you're going on a hike and you're going to brew gongfu style at the top of the mountain, then you won't have 100-degree temperature and it's no problem. You can just enjoy the tea as it is. I just find that if you have compressed tea or tea that's pressed in bowls like oolong tea, it can be a bit harder to get the tea to open when the water is not very hot. But it's okay, you just have time, and that's also what makes every session unique. Yeah, so that was my 2 cents, and if you want to keep discussing that topic, I will let my Discord channel server link available in the description. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that I will shoot more videos in the future. So thank you for watching and see you later. Bye bye.